I actually believe that he was a very sincere person, and with me he was extremely sincere, because I treated him almost like a son of mine. You know, he could have been a son by his age, or as a soldier in my regiment.
As I asked for the letter from Robert Baker and obtained it, when I reached for it, I dropped the newspaper, and this very clean-cut young gentleman standing behind me picked it up and handed it back. I looked at him, and he smiled, and he's young like I am, and he was so clean-cut and so polite that when he asked me if he could walk me home, I said yes. That was how I met Lee Harvey Oswald for the first time. I have to call it instant chemistry. I never felt such an attraction. He was wearing an airline captain pilot's hat, and he had his pilot's jacket on and a ring, and here I'd been told he was Dr. David Ferry, but now I also realized he was Captain David Ferry, had been with Eastern Airlines. This is a man who probably could talk to you on any subject at length. He could discourse on anything. And he could speak knowledgeably to me about cancer research even. He was actually, he said, working on a project. He would like me to see it. He knew who Ochsner was. He not only knew Dr. Mary Sherman, she was his friend. So all of these things were of great interest to me. I wanted very much to know more about this strange man, Dr. David Ferry. I knew that Dr. Ochsner had been working on a variety of different projects, and that because of his association with anti-Castro people such as David Ferry, this seemed very possible to me that Dr. Ochsner and Dr. Sherman might be involved with David Ferry. And of course he spoke knowledgeably of both people. I was already falling in love with Lee Oswald, but I didn't know him that well. So I was concerned, and I asked Lee to show me. I need to find out, really, is the government really involved in this? I might be being lied to. I hadn't even met Dr. Ochsner yet and wasn't supposed to for another few days. There on the wall, there it was. This man was the head of the FBI in Chicago. He carried a beautiful big gun right there on his shoulder holster. He had all kinds of credentials, and he affirmed that Lee was working on an anti-Castro project. That was good enough for me. Lee told me that he was in New Orleans for several reasons. One of them was to make a training film, and that he was working with these anti-Castro insurgents to help teach some of these young Cubans how to use ammunition, how to, do their guns, how to fire, and all that. He was part of this. But he had several other projects he was also working on. He was a very busy man there. Lee accompanied me there and told me that he had to go in first to talk to Dr. Ochsner. This made me recognize that he had already had a prior association with Ochsner. When I went in, Dr. Ochsner began to explain to me, and I'd already been apprised a great deal more by Dr. David Ferry about the project that he had been working on for over a year. And this clearly had to do with working with these deadly cancer strains that he knew I was well adept at handling. The idea was to try and get Castro ill, very ill, and eliminated through what seemed a natural cause, in this case, cancer. The attractiveness of the plan that Dr. Ochsner and Dr. Sherman and David Ferry were working on is that up to now, attempts to kill Castro had to involve some kind of violence that could be traced to some country or individual. And that could lead to war. World War III, maybe, if Russia intervened. This was considered, in my mind, a noble experiment.
No, sir, I'm not a communist, and I think that the red herring and so forth is rather ridiculous to toss into this conversation.
Then are you a Marxist?
Well, I have studied Marxist philosophy, yes, sir, and also other philosophers.
But are you a Marxist? I think you did admit on an earlier radio interview that you consider yourself a Marxist.
Well, I would very definitely say that I am a Marxist. That is correct. But that does not mean, however, that I'm a communist.
What is the difference between the two?
Well, there's a great deal of difference. Several American parties in several countries are based on Marxism, such as Ghana. Certain countries have characteristics of a socialist system, such as Great Britain with its socialized medicine. These, then, are the differences between an outright communist country and countries which adhere to leftist or Marxist principles.
In your work with the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, what are you advocating?
We advocate restoration of diplomatic, trade, and tourist relations with Cuba.
I asked him if he'd ever been to Mexico City, and he became quite upset about that. But this was more, he was more startled. And he said something to the effect, "How did you know about that?" I was approached by one of the senior agents from the counterintelligence squad and was told that there were now new orders, and I was not to talk to Oswald anymore, and I was not to cooperate with the police department in any manner concerning Oswald's background. I have since determined that those orders came directly from Assistant Director William Sullivan, who was in charge of the Foreign Counterintelligence Squad. He was also the person who had direct liaison with the National Security Council. The National Security Council is the President, the Vice President, the Secretary of State, and the Secretary of Defense. That's about as high as you can get.